Here we come, blue and white, and we're looking good. You'll be in for a fight, and we fight pretty good. Getting goals is our job, and we get goals good. Looking good, we are Carlisle United.
Carlisle United, the team that's on the ball. Carlisle United, the team all want to know. You're looking good, and we're with you all the way. You'll hear us singing every time you play.
Hello everyone and welcome to the first of our series of special episodes of the Carlisle United podcast, The Brunton Bugle. In these episodes we'll be taking a step away from the current comings and goings at Brunton Park and taking a nostalgic walk down memory lane. The aim is to cover a wide range of topics from the best loan signings to the worst away days, or look at the all-time great players, matches and seasons, along with some of the more left field topics. Now, for this first episode I would say we were very much going for the left field. As it's episode 1 of the specials, we're going to look at one game wonders. This is of course the players who've played just one competitive first team fixture for the Blues. Me and regular co-host Dan McLennan sat down for a chat recently to discuss this topic. We hope you'll enjoy some of the stories we've discussed. Please remember as well to like and subscribe the podcast wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks very much, and if you want more information go to bruntonbugle.com. Here's me and Dan's discussion.
Balle récupérée par Madar, tout va vite, très vite. Djorkaeff face à Pérez et le ballon qui roule sur le poteau. Pivot de Djorkaeff et c'est Crossi qui rentre ce ballon au fond des filets. Alors, pouvait-il le dégager ou est-il pris dans son élan? Bien difficile de le dire, mais voilà qu'il est... Clever ball. Hope for Wallace, digs out the delivery. It's a chance for O'Halloran! He gets his goal!
Fantastic.
Michael O'Halloran, in need of a goal, gets it with 1 minute played of the second period.
Okay, Dan, first special episode today, and we're going to talk about one game wonders. It's something we've quite fancied talking about for a bit, isn't it, really? It's an interesting topic.
Yeah, I mean, you did a bit of research to begin and produced a list of approximately, I would say, 40 or 50 players.
A little bit more, that's 80 actually.
Is it? I didn't realise there was that many on it. And we've sort of, we've cherry-picked some of our favourites, we'll call it, shall we?
Yeah. We're going to sort of... Me and you are going to have a little discussion about the more recent ones, really. We split them into a few different categories. We'll get onto them later. But first of all, I'm going to give a bit of background on the stats and actually some of the very early stories that aren't as well known, maybe, from the one game wonders.
Yeah, there's a couple you've been telling me in our chats before recording. There's some quite interesting stuff out there once you start having a delve into the catacombs of Carlisle United history.
Yeah, it's one of these things, isn't it? As a club, our history is... It's quite rich, but a lot of it's not that well known, I don't think. I mean, there's very reasons for that. Obviously, the fact that there was a fire at Brunton Park and all the records were lost. So the early years in the Northern League and stuff like that, in the Lancashire combination, just aren't as well known to fans, really.
Yeah, I would say it's sort of 60s onwards that is well documented. As you say, that fire in the early 50s, a lot of stuff obviously got lost in that. And then again with... the two floods in sort of the last few years, you know, quite a few bits and bobs were unfortunately lost in those as well.
Yeah, definitely. There's a lot catching up to do, but hopefully in the next few years we'll start to build up a bit more of an archive, and hopefully on the podcast especially we can help and tell a few of those stories. We've got a really interesting story about one of the earliest players to play for Carlisle United and his life story as well to tell hopefully in a few episodes' time, but I need to do a bit more research on that one.
Yeah, it's definitely a good one. Definitely a good one, that one.
Very good one, that one. Okay, so one game wonders. So I'd say, Dan, as we as fans, the idea of putting on a Carlisle United shirt on to play a game for the club just once is a dream, isn't it? That's something we would love to do. And these players we're going to talk today, they got to live that dream, although you probably find in many of these cases it's not so much a dream as a bit of a nightmare.
Yeah, in fact, some of them were lucky to see out the 90 minutes. I think probably most of them were either subs or got subbed. So,
well,
yeah.
I'll have the stats for you in a minute on that in terms of how many were subs and how many were not. So I've put a list together of all the players, as we mentioned before, since 1928. And you've had a good look through that. You've picked some a few interesting names out that you want to talk about particularly.
Yeah. Some interesting memories with some of these players.
Yeah, well, we don't want to give away too much too early. So, firstly, let me get to the scope and definition of what we're calling one-game wonders. I'll clear that up. So, we are looking at players that have featured in just one first-team league or cup fixture since 1928. As you mentioned before, it's just impossible to trace before then because there's no clear records. And even if you look at the newspapers, they don't always report every single game that happens, so it's difficult to follow. Okay, so that's the scope in terms of time. So this will include league. So obviously I am including the conference season in this. I know that some people think that's a bit controversial, but there you go, it's in there. FA Cup, League Cup, EFL Trophy in its various formats, Conference Cup, and the lesser known Division 3 North League Cup. That was a pre-World War II competition.
I wonder if anyone's still about who attended one of those games.
That's mad, that, isn't it? I didn't even know the competition existed until I was having a look through Paul Harrison's book to do a bit of digging for it. A bit more on that in a minute. So one amazing fact did actually emerge when I was looking through this is that actually, I said League Cup there, we haven't had a single one-game wonder in a League Cup game.
I would say that's probably because we normally play in the early rounds at the start of the season when everyone's fresh and you've built your squad, you're ready to go, and you normally play your strongest team, don't you, in those first couple of rounds?
That's very true. It's very true. But although you do mention that, there is a point that there is one player who did appear on an opening game of the season. We'll get onto him later because he's got an interesting contrast with another player playing that game. Okay, so the research has been done via a few sources. Firstly, for the most recent players, I've used a mixture of Soccerbase and Transfermarkt. Both excellent sources for this kind of thing. If you don't use them at all, you don't look at them yourselves, I'd recommend them highly. Me and Dan pretty much live on those websites at times, don't we?
Yeah, definitely.
They're fantastic for finding out as much as you can. Then they're generally pretty reliable as well. There's only one or two little things in there that aren't quite right.
Soccerbase never used to be that good, but in the last few years they've really upped the game and they're pretty on the ball these days.
Okay, and the second major source is Paul Harrison's Carlisle United, The Complete Record Book. Now, anyone who owns a copy of that book will know that it's a pretty good resource about the club's past. But it can be unreliable at times.
Yeah, I think some of the earlier stuff, I don't think, some of the attendances, some of the appearances even aren't 100%. And, Paul Harrison himself deserves a podcast on his own for some of his kerfuffle.
I think we'd have to get some lawyers involved before we even thought about talking about that one. But yes, but it generally is a good resource. If you compare it with other sources, you'll generally find the right answer in the end, and it's useful if you can contrast it with other things. So a bit of cross-referencing and also using Neil Brown's excellent player records website. If you haven't seen that before as well, that's a not entirely full record, but it's pretty good.
There is a little bit on the homepage. Apparently, sadly, Neil Brown passed away a few years back. And I think it's his wife wrote on that it won't be updated again, but she's going to keep it there as sort of a memento to his passion.
Well, that's quite sad to know. I didn't know that, to be honest. It's a really useful site because it doesn't give you the full stats and statistics, but what it's good for is telling you where players signed from and where they went to after they left clubs. I found a few interesting bits out from there. Okay, so let's look at some of the overall stats that have emerged from my research. So the total number of one-game wonders is 83. 68 of those have come post-war and 30 of them in the 21st century. So it's quite interesting now. There's quite a few that have come since the year 2000, actually. You wouldn't have thought maybe that many, but it's the way it is, I guess. Now, the number one game wonders who scored a goal is just 3. And all of those are just a single goal each, and all of them are very much in the olden days, to put it bluntly. Long time ago.
I would say that there is quite a few recent ones we're going to talk about. Football contracts are getting shorter and shorter, aren't they? And I know we always joke about the one season offers of the last couple of years, but in the past, a player would maybe play for 2, 3, 4 clubs in his career, spend 3, 4, 5 years at each one. Now, players are playing for a dozen clubs, and once you account for loan spells early in the career, you can get lads who are in their early 30s have been at 15, 20 clubs.
I'm sure there is a player at Chelsea, isn't there, who's been at, I think, 9 clubs but never played for Chelsea.
There's about half. There's about half a dozen at Chelsea who've done that.
Well, fun enough, we'll be talking about one of those later, won't we? So the top 3 managers in terms of picking one-game wonders. In joint third place is Dan's favourite, Keith Curle, Roddy Collins and Ivor Brodis. They all picked 5 players each who played just one game for us. In second place is George Bristow, who's one of our pre-World War II managers. And in a clear first place, with 10 picked in his period as manager, is Greg Abbott. Only 3 of Greg's one-game wonders were permanent signings, though, actually, which were Chris Howarth, Marco Gabarsin and Josh Todd, which is quite an interesting one, I think, actually.
Yeah, and well, Josh Todd sort of carved a career out for himself in the Scottish leagues, hasn't he?
The other 2, God only knows where they both are.
Yeah.
But the season with the most one-game wonders was 4 seasons where we had 4 in one season. They were 28-29, which is obviously when George Bristow was manager, 01-02, which is when Roddy was in charge, and the 10-11 and 12-13 seasons, which is when Greg Abbott was in charge. So how many of those were sub-appearances? 23 out of the 83 were sub-appearances, though it should be noted that substitutes were only introduced in 1965.
Good point.
So it's a difficult stat to sort of balance out, really.
Yeah.
How many of them were loan signings? 15 out of the 83. The first one came in the 78-79 season. And how many were in league fixtures? Well, 71 out of the 83 who came in league matches. Anything particularly that surprises you in there, Dan?
Probably, I didn't realise Greg Abbott had used as many. I did sort of, when I flicked through the notes you sent me, I noticed his name, but I didn't realise it was just that many. And because Greg was one of those he was quite settled with his teams, wasn't he?
Yeah, he didn't like to make big changes in teams.
No.
He tried to stick with the 11 as much as he could, really. Sometimes to his detriment, some fans thought. But he also was quite good at using the old loan market where you could still use players for just 1 month at a time as well.
Yes. And he had some good connections. I know we got several from. He was friends with Warren Joyce, who was Man United reserve manager at the time, and he's got a very good contact book, Greg Abbott, which something which a lot of folk didn't really take heed of when he was at Carlisle. Yeah,
it was noticeable how good a loan signings he could get, and in the years since we've probably not really had the same sort of level of player to that standard. Right, so that's all the stats out of the way for now. So let's delve into a few of the names and stories that stand out. So firstly, I'm going to cover the pre-war period. The first one-game wonders actually came in a pair in one game. They were William Brown and William Riley, both featured in the first season.
The 2 Willies.
Yeah, interesting. Now, the other interesting stories from that period, I think William Cowell, although I believe it's Billy Cowell he was generally known as, and Stephen Keane. Now, we'll cover Cowell first. Now, Cowell made only one and only appearance alongside another one-gamer, actually, William Coxley, possibly Billy Coxley again. I think everyone who was called William back then was called Billy, but just the way it was. Clearly a popular name. That's 4 Williams in the first few seasons. Now, Cowell was a goalkeeper. And I'm sure, obviously, if making your debut for your club, you really want to get off to a really good start, don't you, Dan? You want to make sure you have a solid game. Yeah. Didn't happen for William Cowley, to put it bluntly. William Cowell, sorry. He let in 8 goals in an 8-0 loss away to Wigan Borough. And Wigan Borough are a different club to Wigan Athletic. For those who don't know, they were in the league in the very early days and then dropped down when bust. I think Wigan Athletic were formed after that, and they worked their way back into the league. But yeah, that must be pretty crushing, that you'd think, losing 8-0 debut.
Yeah, some debut conceding 8. the defenders in front of him must have been like, what have we got behind us,
Well, it's funny, I thought possibly he was a player maybe from a local league or something who played one game and then just to fill in for a keeper who was injured, something I never played again. But doing a bit of research, I think he might have played for Millwall actually a few years before, possibly maybe Brentford. I'll have a look in a minute and just double check on that. But the one thing that's worth noticing now that two United's biggest stars of that period were McConnell and Hutchinson, and they both missed that game against Wigan for some reason, which may explain why they got absolutely battered.
McConnell was obviously probably the first proper hero at Carlisle United in our when we joined the leagues, and back then players didn't really miss games injured, so there must have been some sort of reason why the two best players weren't playing and we had a debut in goals.
Yep, definitely. Right, actually I've got the book out here. So no, he signed from Millwall, it seems, and then disappeared into non-league football, William Cole. So not really surprised if that's your first and only game for the club, really, is it?
Yeah, but it'd be interesting to see what he actually did for Millwall, how many games, etc.
Yeah, that'd be very interesting. Okay, so that's Carl Clough. Now, Keane is special, Stephen Keane that is, as he's one of the 3 one-game, one-goal players in the club's history. Keane scored the winner in a 1-0 away win to Rotherham in Division 3 North in front of 3,258 fans. From the research I've done, that was his only appearance he ever made in professional football. Incredible, that, isn't it?
Very, very random. You would think if you scored on your debut, you'd certainly get a go in the next game, you know.
Yeah, it's strange when you think. I'm not sure what it was like back then in terms of contracts and things like that. Maybe it was different, but it's a really interesting one actually. Let me have another quick look here. I'm looking through actually not Paul Harrison's second book he did, but it's The Lads in Blue, the original one. Because the one difference between the two books is the original one actually tells you who he signed them from and where they went to as well.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
I discovered having bought it off eBay quite recently. Let's look. He signed from Everton, funny enough, and then went to Tranmere. So interesting.
You would guess that I assume he didn't settle. Decided it wasn't for him. Didn't want to travel. Could be any number of reasons.
You think obviously the M6 didn't expect that either, did it? So it'd be
yeah, and trains would have been a lot slower as well. So
yeah, it's a interesting one. So there are 2 other players who appeared who scored in their one appearance for the club. Firstly, you've got George Gray, who scored in a 2-1 home win over New Brighton FC. Now, there's a name from the annals of past. In the 46-47 season, in front of over 11,000 fans, with his player-manager Ivor Brodis scoring the other goal. He signed from Vale of Clyde, who are a junior league side based near Tollcross Park in Glasgow, I believe. And he left to join Sligo Rovers in Ireland, where apparently he did quite well, actually. He was their top scorer in a few seasons. So yeah. I
wondered if he was maybe passing through on his journey to Ireland and decided to play a game for us.
You fancy a game, mate?
Yeah. Before you get the ferry over from Liverpool, come to New Brighton with us.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting that. Yeah. So it was New Brighton's an interesting club, isn't it? As well, as they obviously don't exist anymore. But yeah, not even as a non-league club. It was a really interesting one.
Yeah, it's not often that happens. You know, I mean. Well, not nowadays. Certainly the older clubs like the aforementioned Wigan Borough, New Brighton, but these days they tend to sort of relaunch teams, don't they?
Yeah, you've got to feel like you gloss up North End, and what's the one? Is it Darwin? I think as well. Maybe there's a few clubs lower down the league that were in the league in the early years. They're now in the lowest rungs of non-league. But New Brighton, their ground now, I think it's just a housing estate on the banks of the Mersey. So. Interesting.
Shame.
Yep. And finally, the last player to scored once and played once was David Bell, who was on the score sheet in a 3-3 draw with Crystal Palace at Brunton Park. David was a youth product, but never played a game after that. Disappeared into obscurity.
I wonder if he was maybe one of those who 2 or 3 injuries and maybe illness, and they said, we'll have to use someone, and he was a lucky one, and he happened to score.
Again, I'll have a look in the book and I'll just double check. So, David Bell, he just says local and local. So, he must have just signed on non-contract terms at that point.
Back then, we used to have sort of reserve teams who played in local leagues. Chances are he's maybe came on trial, played a game and disappeared again.
Seems the obvious answer to that one. But yeah, so that's the very early years boxed off. We thought that was worth giving its own little section. all the other players in that period, there's not massive amounts of information on them. And again, like you said, Dan, it's just players who sort of just come and go, really. They don't hang around for very long. Obviously, we'll get to the more modern eras now. I think the only other player really was interesting then was Ron Oosthuizen, I think. You want to have a go at pronouncing that one?
Having worked with a lot of lads from South Africa, it will be Oosthuizen.
Oosthuizen. There you go. So he's the only other really interesting one, a South African lad who played one game. Round about, I think, the same time as Alf Ackerman, actually. So it's quite an interesting one. Yeah, so there's him. And I think the only one I'd probably pick from the really early periods would be, I think it's Mickey Horswell, wasn't it? I think he played in Sunderland in the FA Cup final in the mid-70s. Yes. He played one game for us in the mid-80s and disappeared. So we're going to now move on to the ones that you picked out, Dan. Actually, I'll let you pick out some of the ones from the later periods. So should we start with the foreign league ones first?
Yes, what we've done is I've picked. I'm just counting up here. I think there's 19 of them, and we've split them into 4 sections. We've got the Foreign Legion, the on loan youngsters who actually made a career in the game, the why did we even bother youngsters. And then just to finish off, we'll have a sort of a little random selection of not bizarre, but just they played one game for us, and then various different things happened for various reasons. But anyway, let's get on the Foreign Legion.
So first up, go on, you do, Dan. It's your list, so go on.
This is a good one, this. We're going to go back to 2016. He will have been a Keith Curl signing. And the fantastic flying Angolan-born Dutch winger, Luis Pedro.
Yeah, he was an interesting one, wasn't he? There was a bit of excitement when he signed, because he, by all accounts, did quite well in training and in a reserve game, I think. And I remember his debut, and it was genuinely like it was almost comical, really, the way he was playing it. I mean, the defences didn't know what to do. He was like a lad was on his PlayStation controller, wasn't he? Just pressing all the buttons to his skill. He
was like one of these freestyle footballers, wasn't he? He sort of came on, flicked it about, rolled it about, but didn't actually do anything with it. And the first couple of times you see it, you get a bit excited and think, oh, this lad could have something about him, but no, he just never did.
No, he was an interesting one. You've done a bit of research, haven't you, on what he's been up to and where he has been from, actually?
Yeah, well, he actually started in the youth systems at Maastricht and then Feyenoord, and he moved on to Excelsior, Go Ahead Eagles and Heracles. So he's done a little bit of a tour of the Dutch leagues. And then he's one of these players who ended up on like the Eastern European circuit. He had a season apiece in Bulgaria at Botev Plovdiv and Levski Sofia.
Great names.
And then he ended up at Targu Mares in Romania before landing on his trial here. And he made his debut in the 3-2 Eastermunde win over Bristol Rovers. He didn't feature again as rumours about training. He had all the gear, no idea, basically.
Yeah. all the skills, but he just didn't have a brain on him.
Yeah.
Those kinds of things, yeah.
And he disappeared in the summer, and he went back to Holland, and he actually did quite well at Maastricht, where he began his career, and then Volendam before sort of dropping into the Dutch non-league, and he still plays today, but not at any sort of decent level.
Yeah, it's an interesting, wasn't it? I mean, maybe he's one of those players who actually is technically very good and fits into like a Dutch way of playing, but just doesn't work in England.
Yeah, I think from the brief glimpse we got of him, he obviously had the skills that you sort of associate with Dutch players, but I don't think the umph and grumph of League Two football was for him.
Certainly not. Next up, Marco Gabarsin. An interesting one, actually, because I got to see him because I was working at the club at the time in the media team, and I got to see him in training, and actually he didn't look too bad when I saw him playing, actually.
Yeah, it was 2011 he came in. He had quite good stock. He was French born. He was a youth player at Bordeaux. Then he went to Grenoble. Then he moved over to, a lot of French players moved to Belgium. And looking through the teams, he was at SK Lumbeck, Verton, and the best spell of his career was 3 years at Royal Antwerp, which is
It's a decent standard, isn't it?
yeah. And then he got a transfer lined up with Bologna in Italy, but Antwerp wouldn't let him move. So when his contract did run out, he moved to Bologna, but then they got taken over a week later, and the new owners cancelled the contracts of every player.
Typical Italian, that, isn't it?
Well,
It's
yeah.
no change there.
So he was a free agent, went to Denmark, and then sort of landed here in December 2010. And as you say, apparently by all accounts impressed in training, signed his initial month deal, made his debut off the bench in that 1-0 defeat at Torquay in the Cup, and then he signed a deal to the end of the season, and fair enough. For whatever reason, he didn't really feature, and then all of a sudden he ended up at Walsall on loan, where it was seemingly he played all right from reading a few newspaper reports. But then we released him. While he was a free agent, he then made his international debut for the Central African Republic.
Good stuff.
And then he returned to Belgium with a few lower division clubs before disappearing off the radar.
Yeah, the interesting one. You think back to the team we had back then: Thirlwell, Noble, Berrett, Taiwo. It's not going to be easy when you've got solid performers you can perform week in, week out.
Yeah, especially
to
at
break in.
League One level as well, wasn't it?
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. But my memory of him actually seeing him training down at Morecambe, funny enough, because it was the time when I think that the winter was quite bad that year, and we actually did some training on the pitch behind Morecambe's ground.
That's
Because
right,
we
yes.
didn't have any.
Yeah.
But I was one of those things, isn't it? That we go on about a lot, don't we? That it's a pretty bit of a disgrace that as a club we don't have facilities like the likes of Morecambe have even got.
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
but yeah, anyway. Okay, and up next we've got Miguel Dominguez, aka Bambi on Ice.
Wow, what a player this was.
Yeah.
He was a Guadeloupe national. I'm pretty sure he's the only Guadeloupean to play for Carlisle off the top of my head. He moved to France as a teenager, Amiens, Stade Reims, before landing up at Swindon on a trial where he did quite well, and then moved to Cardiff for 3 seasons. During that last season at Cardiff, the 10-11 season, he didn't really feature for them. And Greg Abbott offered him a loan deal, I think with a view to moving in the January if it was any good. Unfortunately, he just wasn't any good at all. He came on in the FA Cup game at home to Tamworth, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Where we were absolutely dreadful in the first half. We were 1-0
very lucky
down.
that day, very lucky.
Yeah, we were 1-0 down, and he was actually subbed at half time for another poor player, Tom Cruise from Arsenal,
Yeah.
who certainly wasn't a Top Gun, got to get the pun in. But we managed to turn that game round and won it. But we then had a run of postponements due to bad weather during the December, and he didn't play any games for us. And on his return to Cardiff, he was told he was free to move. I think he went to Southend for the rest of that season before going to MLS with Colorado Rapids, and then landing back up at Stevenage, and then another one who just simply disappears.
Yeah, I think that season at Cardiff when we got him on loan, I think he'd had a bad knee injury. Or he'd certainly had a bad injury at some point. And I think he was basically working his way back to fitness when we signed him on loan. And I think that was half the problem.
Yeah,
he just was nowhere near fit enough to be playing. And at the time, I think we had issues with left-backs in we, and Matty Robson was having to fill in there. And a lot of fans obviously didn't particularly rate Robson at left-back. But actually, I think looking back, he did all right there. And
We've had plenty worse than Matty Robson play left-back.
Oh, yes, definitely. And I think Dominguez was brought in with the idea of he did really well at Swindon, he can perform at this level, and it just never worked out at all.
No, not at all.
No.
Right, I'm just looking on the list, and we're going back to the 90s now.
Yes.
For a couple.
This
Two
is
of them.
the cracker, this one.
The first one up is the Phantom Pier, we will call him. Jean-Claude Pagal in 1998, and known as the Phantom Pier for an incident, shall we call it, during his one and only game. A little bit of background for those who don't know. Pagal was an ex-Cameroon international, played in the 1990 campaign.
Played for England, did he?
Yes, he did. He did, yeah. The classic African player route, played a lot of his football in France. I think he had several years at Lens, 3 years at Saint Etienne, and he had a year at Martigues where a certain Stefan Punavacci was his teammate, which is likely the link that saw him end up here, I would have thought.
You'd imagine they'd probably share an agent, wouldn't they? You'd have
yeah. And before he came here, he actually ended up in Mexico with Club America, then in Belgium for a little bit, before landing here in February 98. And he made his debut in a 1-0 defeat at Gillingham, which was just bog standard defeat at the time, you know. But apparently halfway through, I think it was the first half, he went over, curled up as though he was injured. Obviously, a couple of the players ran past checking he was all right, and when they looked, he was relieving himself on the pitch, and physio Dolly came on, and I think he was just amazed at what he saw and pretended to treat his injury, poured some water on the affected area, and up he jumps and got on with it. And I think he was subbed around the hour mark, and he was on the bench a couple of times afterwards, and then disappeared from Brunton Park. He actually went to China and Malta, and then made a comeback in the Cameroon League in his mid-40s. And seemingly he's been a bit of a general manager and some youth football scheme involvement, and was actually director of a London-based sport agency a few years back. Although I know when John Coleman did an article on him the other year, by all accounts he's now happily retired and chilling out in Cameroon.
Not bad life if you can have it.
Yes, and the second one, the infamous Laurent Crocky.
Now, this one, before you start, would you argue this is probably the one who's been the most successful in the game, but played just one game for us?
When I read what I'm about to read, you would have to say yes, because he was a French sort of defender come midfielder in his early 30s. He had 10 years at Sochaux, over 300 games for them. And then he had another 4 years with Bordeaux, where he had another 150 games, including, now this is the one, not many Carlisle players have done this, he played in the 1996 UEFA Cup final against Bayern Munich. And his teammates included Zinedine Zidane, Bixente Lizarazu, Christophe Dugarry, and the Dutchman Richard Ritschke, which is not a bad team to be involved in, eh?
Yeah, it's not bad that you'd think he'd be looking forward to playing with Tony Craig, Will Varty and Alan Smart though after that, sure.
Well, you would hope so, wouldn't you? And I think after that summer he was released. He appeared at Dundee for a trial and a game, and then he reappeared a year later here. And the game he played in we played Preston North End live on Sky.
Sky, yeah, I remember that.
I think it was a Friday night from memory, and it wasn't long after David Reeves had went there in a transfer. I think Reeves scored the goal actually from memory. But he seemingly disappeared after that game. But the tale that came out a few years later, seemingly he'd went up to each player individually and sort of said, "Oh, I can't use my cash card here. Can I borrow some money till I get sorted?" And each player said, "Yeah, no bother, it's 40 quid, 50 quid or whatever." But apparently he did it to the entire squad, so landed himself a couple of grand or so, and then
just did a runner.
Well, I wouldn't say he did a runner, but his trial finished and off he went, and the players said goodbye to the money. But he actually is also one of those who's done quite well out of the game. Well, not out of the game, but out the playing side, because he moved into French non-league management with a few teams before becoming assistant at a team called Croix de Savoie, who were probably better known as Evian for a couple of years due to the sponsorship of the water company. And then he was manager of Mulhouse for 2 or 3 years before, again, sort of disappearing into the footballing wilderness.
Oh, wow. It's quite an interesting one, that one.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's the foreign legion, as we'll put it, out of the way. There was a few of us on there that we could have talked about, but I think we might have moved them into other categories as well.
Yeah, there was one or two who sort of stretched through 2 and 3 categories, but they were certainly the ones that stood out from the foreigners who've appeared at Carlisle.
Yeah. Okay, I think we'll just take a quick break now, and we'll come back in a short while. We'll talking about the on-loan youngsters who've made a career in the game since leaving.
Yeah, and a couple of these, after their appearances at Carlisle, it's probably a surprise to most Carlisle fans that they actually did make a career, because it was that bloody bad for us.
I know, exactly. It's baffling.
But, yes.
Yeah. Right, back in a minute.
Forward by Waddle twice in that attack. Warhurst closing in here. Oh, good touch! Brilliant! Warhurst! He's there again! Well, it's number 17 for Warhurst. And the sign of a good striker. A converted one, maybe. But when you miss a chance, don't let it get to you. And here, Waddle plays the first ball through.
Okay, everyone, we're back, rising from the ashes like David Hughes after his disastrous one performance for us. Maybe mention him a little bit later on. So, Dan, the on-loan youngsters who made a career in the game, who have you got here?
Right, first up, we're going to 2012. Well, there's actually 2 in 2012. The first one is Sean McGinty, who he went to Man United as 16-year-old, product of the Charlton Academy. And he progressed to a professional contract at Man United, had a couple of loans at Morecambe and Oxford before landing here on loan in November 2012. He didn't make his debut until Boxing Day, however, coming on as an 89th minute sub for Chris Chandler. So this is possibly the shortest appearance in the one-game list, I would say. I'm
pretty sure it is. We don't have details of the earlier subs, but from the ones I know, I'm fairly certain this is the shortest.
Yeah, we can't even talk about his performance. You know, it was 1 minute. So. But seemingly, I don't think he was the best trainer, and he had further loan spells at Tranmere before joining Sheffield United on a permanent deal. And he was one of those who, when he moved, he sort of admitted to making a few mistakes in his career.
Yeah, from what I can gather, we signed him on loan as a favour to Man United. I think because they were giving us some decent players like the likes of Ben Amos and Tom Lawrence. I think the way he'd behaved, I think he might have been a bit in trouble with the law possibly at some point. Not 100% on that, so I've got to be very careful. But yeah, I think basically Man United's reserved him to people, said, look, will you just take him? We want him to learn.
Yeah, see what football's really about.
Yeah, and obviously he'd had his loan spells before elsewhere, but I think they wanted him to try and... It sounds terrible that, but sending him to Carlisle to teach him a lesson. But that's essentially what they were trying to do. And by all accounts, he didn't particularly learn it.
No. I mean, I know when he went to Sheffield United, he didn't really do much there. He had more loans to Northampton and Rochdale, which I think became a permanent. And then he sort of had another couple of loans to Halifax and Aldershot, where he moved permanently. And I think his time at Aldershot, he must have grown up a little bit, because he went to Torquay for a season, and then he ended up at Partick, which was a bit of a random transfer, Torquay to Partick. And I think in January this year, he moved on to Greenock Morton for the rest of the season. So he's one of those who sort of carved a bit of a career for himself.
Well, he's certainly got the miles in, hasn't he?
He's been up and down, hasn't he?
Yeah, it's a mad one, isn't it? But yeah, he's an interesting one. Interestingly as well, I'm pretty sure the game that he was a one-game wonder in, Josh Todd was also a one-game wonder in that game as well, actually.
Right.
If I'm right, I think they both appeared in the same game.
Right.
Yeah.
Yes. Anyway, so Sean McGinty, he's not the greatest career, but he's certainly made a living from the game. The other one in 2012 is Michael O'Halloran, a Glaswegian lad who's on Celtic's books as a kid before joining Bolton. He had a short loan spell at Sheffield United. Then he signed on a 1-month loan for us in August 2012, which was mutually terminated 12 days later. And his only appearance was a 20-minute sub-appearance in a 2-0 defeat at Milton Keynes. Which I think he was one of those who, once he came here, he just was like, do I really want to do this?
Yeah, there was suggestions, wasn't there? I seem to remember at the time that he had a particularly bad attitude in training.
Yeah.
The rest of the squad didn't take well to that, from what I can gather.
I think he was one of these who maybe thought he was a bit above our level.
Yeah.
When at the time he wasn't, and he had another loan at Tranmere in the same season, did a little bit better, but he moved back up to Scotland in 2014 to St Johnstone, where he had a real purple patch, which resulted in a move to Glasgow Rangers in February.
Because he was started out at Celtic, isn't he? Really?
Yeah. First of February, which must have been the last day of the window, he signed for Rangers, and it never really happened for him at Rangers, and he went back to St Johnstone on loan. Then he moved to Melbourne City randomly, but it didn't last long, and he returned to St Johnstone, where he remains to this day.
Yeah, he's an interesting one. He seems to have done fairly well for himself since he's left us, actually. But clearly there was a problem with attitude when he was here. So, but yeah.
Again, he's probably one of these young lads from a bigger club who's the pennies dropped finally, Next up, we have Ashley Eastham, 2010. He was a product of Blackpool's youth system, loaned out several times. Obviously, at the time, Blackpool was sort of Championship and even Premier League for a little bit. He had spells at Hyde and Cheltenham and came to Brunton Park in November 2010. And he made his only appearance in the same game as Miguel Cominges, the 3-2 win over Tamworth. Again, as we said earlier, we were terrible that game and really got away with it. He obviously didn't really impress. He went back to the seaside, further loans, Bury a couple of times, Fleetwood and Notts County, before making a permanent move to Rochdale. 3 years there, Fleetwood in 2016, before he moved to Salford City in January this year. But I don't think he really played, obviously, with the curtailment of the season. But he's one of those who's had a sort of solid, if unspectacular career.
Yeah, he's made a lower league career for himself, hasn't he? To be honest, I struggle to remember much of what he did. I don't think he played that badly maybe that day. But then again, having Cominges alongside him maybe made him a bit more nervous than he needed to be.
Yeah, I think we'd have fancied our chances playing in defence beside Miguel Cominges, wouldn't we?
Oh, definitely.
Yeah. Next up is probably the player who, in this category, certainly, who's definitely had the best career.
I think he's the one who's gone on to have the best career after he's left us and having played one game, probably. Yeah,
definitely. Yeah. The player we're talking about is Corey Evans, Belfast born, moved to Man United when his older brother Johnny went. Corey then joined the youth setup himself. Usual through into the reserves, and he was on the fringes of the squad when he came to Carlisle. I think the move was designed to get him some proper football into him, shall we say. And at the time, the previously mentioned link between Warren Joyce and Greg Abbott was in full swing, and Evans started in a 1-1 draw away to Bristol Rovers in October 2010, and unfortunately he took ill afterwards.
I remember that. Yeah.
Missed a couple of games, and then I think he had some sort of hamstring problem, I think it was, and it basically curtailed his loan because we needed players who were playing, and he went back to Man United. I think he went back to Hull on loan before making the move permanent in the following summer. He had a couple of decent seasons at Hull before moving to Blackburn in 2013, and he's still at Blackburn now.
He's captain, I think, isn't he?
Yeah, he's made 200 appearances, as well as 50 international appearances for Northern Ireland, including 3 appearances in their Euro 2016 campaign. So I would definitely say he's the one game wonder who's probably gone on to have the most successful career in football.
Yeah, since he's left us at least. Anyway, obviously,
Yeah.
we potentially look at the man with the broken bank card as being the one who's had the best career before he came to at least. Anyway.
Yeah. And last in this one is a name that sends a bit of a shudder down Carlisle fans' spine when he's mentioned. Harry Worley. He was one of these players at Chelsea when the stockpiling began. I think he started at Stockport. He was signed for Chelsea after a good battle for his signature. And I think he had a short loan at Doncaster before he came to us at the start of the 2007 season.
Well, the fans were very excited about him signing, weren't they? I seem to remember.
Yeah, I mean, he was one of these who had a bit of a reputation, you know. He's signed from Stockport for good money. He must have something about him. And he made his debut in a game against Cheltenham, and it was absolutely terrible. He looked like a rabbit in the headlights. I think he lasted 45 minutes before Paul Arneson came off the bench for him, and it was that bad.
I think we had to shift David Raymond to centre back, didn't we, to cover that position as well?
Yeah. I mean, he obviously he didn't really last his loan. He went back to London, and he moved to Leicester on loan, and then made a permanent move. And then he had typical young player loan spells at Luton and Crewe. Then he joined Oxford for 3 seasons, which, you know, was probably the best spell of career. He had a move to Newport, had a year at Stevenage, and then he had a bad injury while at Stevenage, and I think he had spells at Hartlepool and Salford before having to retire in 2016. So he actually carved a semi-decent lower league career, but on the basis of his 45-minute cameo at Brunton Park, you know, you'd have done well to see him play at Melbourne Park, I would have said.
Yeah. Isn't he one as well who's maybe doing some sort of scouting as well now? I think maybe for Chelsea, I seem to remember reading something. Yeah,
I think he's there's a lot of players do now with the big clubs having such big operations. I think he's the Northwest scout for Chelsea. So he probably spends his time watching under-23 football, etc.
Yeah, I'm just looking back there thinking making your debut against Cheltenham is always going to be tough because they're always been a big physical side, so I can't imagine that would have been much fun for him. I'm not sure if Kaede Odujayi was still playing for Cheltenham back then, but I always remember him being an absolute nightmare for him.
Yeah, it was probably the usual aerial bombardment of Cheltenham teams of the time.
Yep, definitely. Okay, so I think that's covered off those ones. The only other one I'd probably mention in there maybe would be David Hughes. He's one a little bit further back. I think he was 1998 possibly. Let me get my spreadsheet on, double check on that one. I'll put this spreadsheet up actually on Twitter or something. Everyone can have a look at it and see exactly who's listed. Where is he at? David Hughes. There he is, 97-98. He was a loan signing from Aston Villa, wasn't he? And he was someone who a lot was thought of actually, wasn't there? And I think very similar to Worley, he had an absolute nightmare of a debut, I seem to remember, and ended up getting hauled off. And we thought, you'll never see him again. He's one who's going to disappear into the obscurity.
My only memory of him was he really tall?
I think he was quite a tall lad. Yeah, he was a tall, quite well built lad there. I think. Yeah,
6'3", 6'4" type level.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, we thought he'd disappear, but he actually turned up at Shrewsbury Town 3 years later playing against us. And he was excellent for them. It was bizarre. And we were all like, how on earth has he become such a good player? And he got a big move to Cardiff, I think, for about $500,000.
Yeah.
But it didn't quite work out from there. I think he got a career-ending injury actually at one point, and he had to curtail his career. So that's the only one I would have mentioned in that one. Up on next, I think this is part 3, isn't it? So we got the Why Did We Even Bother youngsters. Some absolutely belting names in here as well, isn't there?
Yeah, and the first one in the list is, I was stood in the car park talking to some friends when the team was announced at 6:45, and Keith Curle unveiled 2 new signings.
Keith Curle special.
Who nobody had heard of. There was the one we're talking about, James Hooper, and a young lad called Joe Ward. But starting with Hooper, he was a young striker. He'd been at Rochdale, and Keith was obviously just trying to mix it up a bit. We
were playing Luton, who were up with us going for sort of promotion, and you can see their squad, and we signed these 2 lads, and you think to yourself, and this was around the time when there was that big campaign to raise money, wasn't there? I think.
Yeah.
And this is the best we could manage.
And the young lad Hooper, he came on. I think he only had maybe 10 minutes as a replacement for Sean Miller, who'd obviously ran himself into the ground like he did. And he was released at the end of the season, and he went on a tour of non-league clubs in the northwest. Looking at my list, I've got FC United, Radcliffe Borough, Salford before the money, and Chorley before dropping even further to the likes of Altrincham and Witton Albion. You know,
that is a low level. That is.
Yeah, I mean, fair play is still playing, which in comparison to the other lad who never actually made an appearance, Joe Ward, he got that fed up with the game. He actually quit it after leaving us.
I don't think he was actually even after he left us, was it? I think when he was still signed to us, didn't he just say it to Curl or someone like, I'm just not interested anymore, I'm just going to quit.
Yeah, basically, yeah, he's just sort of, I haven't got the fight for it anymore.
It's interesting, like, it does happen with some players, because I remember that young lad in Paul Simpson's first season in charge, David Molloy.
Yes.
He looked a real good prospect coming from the youth team, and he played about a dozen games. But then it just disappeared, and it turned out he'd basically told the club, I don't want to play anymore. And they were like, well, we've got you contracted. And he was like, oh, it's fine, just keep all of my registration on. And I think he went to work as a plumber or something like that.
Yeah.
Lost interest. It does happen.
Yeah.
It's easy for us to say it's a dream to play professional football, but until you're actually in that bubble and see what it's like.
Yeah.
It's a completely different world.
Yeah, but that was a strange night when those 2 were named. Next up, we have a player who actually played against Carlisle last season, Jeffrey Monacana.
Yes.
Landed on loan from Brighton in March 2015. He'd actually started at Arsenal as a youth. He was at Preston for a couple of years, and then he moved to Brighton's development squad, as they call them. And he was loaned out to quite a random bunch of teams, Crawley, Aberdeen, Mansfield, before I think we signed him just as the loan window was about to close. And he just didn't really do much. He made his 1 appearance, starting in a 2-1 defeat away at Oxford, replaced on the hour by Asamoah, and then just didn't feature again. He went back to Brighton before going to Bristol Rovers on loan, and then he randomly, when he was released by Brighton in early 2016, he ended up with FC Voluntari in Romania, which is from Brighton under 23s to the Romanian league's a strange move.
Yeah, it's a strange one, that.
But he returned to England, and then he's been on the southern non-league roundabout that a lot of these players down south end up on. And as I mentioned, he played against us for Dulwich Hamlet in the televised FA Cup game.
Yeah, one of only 2 players, I think, to have played for both clubs. The other one being?
Jimmy Glass.
Indeed, correct.
Yeah, so another who just, I know some non-league players down south can make a half-decent living from the game, but he was one of those that, just why did we bother with him,
Yeah.
But
this next one, though, in fact, these next 2, 100% are on the why on earth did we bother list. It just pointless signings. Pointless.
Oh, they were dreadful. I mean, both sort of came with a view to making permanent moves, didn't they? Because they were at their clubs, and they weren't that level, but certainly good enough to possibly play at our level. The 2 we're talking about are Lucas Dawson in March 2014, and Craig Rodden from Liverpool in late 2013. So both actually in the same season.
Yeah.
But Dawson, he played an hour in a 4-1 defeat at Peterborough, and
I was convinced that he'd never played for us. I was convinced until I looked the list up that he signed on loan, but we never actually used him. I didn't even realise he played again.
Well, that shows how memorable his appearance was, doesn't it?
Exactly.
And he was released by Stoke at the end of that season. I think he went to Nuneaton for a couple of games, and then he's been at Telford and Chester City. The last I could find of him was a trial at Crewe about 18 months ago, and nothing ever since.
One of the million players that Graham Kavanagh signed that season.
Yeah, the loan figures that season were ridiculous, weren't they?
We'll do an episode on loan signings at some point, and that season will feature heavily.
Rodden was a passing midfielder with a decent reputation. You know, apparently he'd been good through all the age groups at Anfield, but he just didn't quite kick on when he became pro, and he got a 20-minute or so run out as a sub in a 4-1 win over Tranmere. But he just looked... I remember this game. He just looked so off the pace. It was, it was like, this lad...
I didn't go to that game because I think I was living down in London at the time. But all I remember about that game was that Tom Lawrence had a blinder. So if he managed to stand out as poor in a game where Tom Lawrence is running the game, tells you a lot, probably.
But no, he looked off the pace, and he had a further loan at Accrington before being released. He then actually signed for Accrington, but halfway through the following season with them, he went to Witton Albion, which it's not a great level.
It's about Carlisle City level, isn't it?
Yeah, he randomly ended up moving to the League of Ireland with Sligo Rovers, and he actually had a couple of years there, so he must have done all right there. But the sort of trail goes cold, and he was last seen playing for Mosley in the Northern Premier League Division 1 North West early last season. And it makes you wonder, these lads, they're at likes of Stoke and Liverpool, and 5 years later they're nowhere. It's
you almost wonder if these clubs stockpiling these players, is it really worth it in the end? I mean, for the clubs it probably is, because one of them will come off and make them money, and the other ones are just basically cannon fodder. They're just collateral, really, isn't it?
I know we've mentioned Chelsea when we talked about Harry Worley, but Chelsea make about 30-40 million a season selling those that don't make it, because they're still decent players and they go to decent clubs in Europe, and it actually selling half a dozen of them maybe pays for one big signing coming in, But we've got one left on this list, and he's probably the only Albanian player we've had.
We will do United Nations of Carlisle United at some point. Yeah, that'll be one worth doing.
He was actually a Swiss national, but he was of Albanian heritage, and I think he played under 19 or under 21. It was a lad called Valentin Gjokaj, and he came on loan from Derby in late 2012. And he had a decent career. It started off early. He was at FC Lucerne, where he was born. Played for the second team. Obviously, a lot of European leagues have second teams at a decent level. And he was released in summer 2012, and he actually had a trial at Newcastle United, but he didn't get taken on, and I think he went to Derby, who liked the look of him, so he went into their development squad, and then he came here on loan to get some football into him. His only appearance was from the bench at half-time in an FA Cup game against Bournemouth. He came on for Frank Simek. We were 2-0 down at half-time, and from memory, Gjokaj was more a central defender, so I'm wondering if we changed formation to chase the game.
I think he played it right back, I think he just filled in. I think Simek might have had a knock and he just filled in.
Possibly, yeah. But we got beat 3-1 in the game, and he never played again, and he returned to Derby. He actually had a loan at Barnet, and then he signed for a year at Gateshead. And after that, he sort of disappears a bit, and then I think he landed at a German Oberliga team, SSV Reutlingen, in 2016, and then he literally vanishes. Which again, I know he's not in the UK football scene, but it obviously happened. It shows it happens abroad as well, doesn't it?
I'm just looking up that SS Reutlingen just to see where they are. It's just a little bit south of Stuttgart. And looking at their pitch, it is a 3G pitch. It looks like it's based behind another team's ground. It's a bit of a weird setup. So
Possibly.
But yeah, it's a very low level, that, to be fair. I've been to watch a game at Oberliga level in Germany, and the standard is about Carlisle City level at times.
Yeah. But no, that's the why did we even bother category.
Okay, well, next one is the random section. These are just a few random odd ones. A couple of them just very unusual sort of signings in terms of people and where they've been. One of them was a big star before he came to us, and clearly just couldn't be asked. And one of them was just one of the worst games you could possibly imagine. So let's get them started then. Come on, first one.
We'll go with the big name first, which was Paul Warhurst. February 2004, 34-year-old. Everyone, bloody hell, Paul Warhurst signing for Carlisle.
Good signing, wasn't it?
Oldham, Sheffield, Blackburn, Crystal Palace, Bolton. Solid defender, he was just what we needed in our battle. But a quick look at that season showed he'd already played for Bolton, Chesterfield and Barnsley. And I think that should maybe have set off the alarm bells, shouldn't it? He came off the bench away to Macclesfield for about 25 minutes. He had a yellow card, and then next thing he was saying it was too far to travel for training. So he obviously just didn't have the stomach for a fight and decided it wasn't worth a hassle. He actually played for 3 more seasons, because he went to Grimsby after us.
5 clubs in one season, incredible.
And then he went to Blackpool, Forest Green, Wrexham and Barnet. But I think across those 7 or 8 clubs was a total of 60 appearances, which again tells its own story, And yeah, I think he actually played a couple of games for Northwich before retiring, but it just didn't happen. Very similar to Clive Allen, actually.
Yeah, well, the interesting one with him, I always thought, was the fact that he said it was too far him to travel. He ended up signing for Grimsby, and he lived in South Manchester, I think, at the time. And someone worked out it was pretty much just as far to get to Grimsby as it was to get to Carlisle from there. And the fact that you've got to go over the M62, which anyone who's ever driven over the M62 will tell you is just awful at rush hour. So
yeah.
I think I agree with you. I think he just didn't fancy the fight.
Basically, yeah. Next up, I can't even say this game. It was so bad.
Barry Thompson, I'll say it. Go on.
Barry Thompson at Ilkeston Town in the FA Cup. Good God, what a game! Every time
I didn't go to that, but I remember listening on the radio and how painful it was to listen to.
You lucky bugger! You lucky bugger! We actually took the lead that day through Paul Harris, but this was a season where we had about 7 keepers for various reasons, and I can't remember. We had a couple of injuries, and nobody actually knew who was going to play in goal for us. And when the team came out,
I think we had 7 keepers on the books over that season.
Yeah. And when the team was announced, number 1 for Carlisle, Barry Thompson, and everyone's going, Barry who? Because this was before you sort of Google and Wikipedia, which would be your first port of call these days. It turns out, having done a bit of reading into him, he'd actually played that year, the summer season, in Iceland for a team with a bit of coaching, and he'd literally, I think he'd flown back into Scotland 2 or 3 days before, and obviously we'd put an SOS out, and his agent was like, Barry Thompson, he's played in Iceland, he'll do for you. So he came, he turned up, he played very badly, and then disappeared. But the funny thing is, he was actually still playing 2 or 3 years ago.
Highland League, wasn't it?
Yeah, he was actually at Dundee to begin, and I think he was sort of their reserve keeper. And apparently he has the most consecutive bench appearances without playing a game for them at 55 games. And he was
just
a
as
bit
well for them, really, isn't it?
Yeah, he was a nomad. He went to Montrose, Far East, Stirling. And like I say, the team he played for in Iceland were actually called FC4, as in the Marvel superhero.
Superb.
But apparently he went to Brechin, Ross County and Montrose afterwards. I've seen his name at Peterhead, Cove Rangers, Coulter. I think he's one of these who's played for about 35 Scottish junior teams and Highland teams.
Superb.
And he was still coaching up until a couple of years ago.
Well, didn't he concede a goal straight from a corner in that game against Ilkeston? I seem to remember.
Yes.
Yeah, and obviously playing for Ilkeston that day was Tony Hemmings.
Yes, who we later signed.
Yeah, he had a blinder, I think, for them that day.
Yeah.
But I was just, while you were talking there, Dan, I worked out how many keepers we had that season. We had 8 goalkeepers on the books at some point. Possibly 9. There might have been a youth keeper who was used on the bench at some point. I'm not 100% sure.
Yeah.
But we had Luke Weaver, Peter Keane, Paul Heritage, who never played a game for us, but was on the books for about 3 years, I think.
Yeah.
Michael Ingham, who was on loan from Sunderland. Peter van der Kwak, on loan from Reading.
Yeah.
Andy Dibble played 2 games for us. He was close to being a player who only played 1 game, but he played 2. Barry Thompson, obviously. And there was the Norwegian fella whose name I can't remember off the top of my head now, but me and you have chat with John Coleman about him, haven't we?
Yeah, I can't remember his name, but he actually got injured running for his flight
to
to
catch his
Manchester.
taxi. He pulled his hamstring, didn't he?
Yeah, and he didn't get the flight.
So, sadly, because that would have been our only Norwegian, I think, to play for us as well.
Yeah. Yes, but I can't talk about him anymore. That's Barry Thompson.
Right, there you go. Out of the way. Let's just talk about the unusual career ones.
Yeah, first up we've got, well, they were both sort of the same season, I think, or the same year, 1996. First up we had Dylan Kerr. He was he was at Reading for 3 decent seasons before he landed here. He'd been at Sheff Wednesday. He'd been to South Africa for Arcadia Shepherds. He went to Leeds, Doncaster, Blackpool, and he came to Carlisle, and he only had a 12-minute appearance from the bench in a 1-0 win over Darlington. But then he had a hamstring injury, and he was released due to this career-threatening injury. He got signed for Kilmarn a couple of weeks later, and was there for about 3-4 years.
Well, he played against us in a pre-season game, I seem to remember about that time.
Yeah. And he had a few more clubs, Kidderminster, Hamilton, Exeter, Morton, East Stirling, and then a few non-league games. But it's his after career that's of more interest, because having Googled him and made some notes, his coaching career, he's done FA stuff in England and Scotland, before several roles in coaching and management in South Africa, Vietnam and Tanzania, which is quite a selection of countries.
Yeah, it's quite interesting. You do get the odd coaches, though, from this country, don't you? They just seem to love coaching in random countries abroad and just do little tours almost. I remember there was a fella, wasn't there? Constantine, wasn't he? I think he was called. I can't remember, but maybe Leon Constantine, possibly?
No, that was a striker. Stephen Constantine, I think it is.
That's the one. I couldn't remember his name, but for years I always wanted him to be our manager because he'd done so well abroad at these different clubs. Yeah. But I don't think he ever got a chance in this country, did he?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of book about him. There's certainly been articles about him, yeah. But no, the other one was Danny Donachie, who he came from Radcliffe Borough, made his one appearance from the bench in a 1-0 against Stockport, which, if memory serves me, was actually on my birthday, my 18th actually. And then his career seemed to finish quickly as it began, because all I could find was he went back to Radcliffe and then no mention of him. But I would say he probably only signed because of his dad, who was on our coaching team at the time, being Willie Donachie.
Willie,
yeah. But it's his post sort of career. He's a very well up physio at Everton, and he's apparently a leading expert in meditation and mindfulness.
Oh.
And he's now actually back at Everton as a second spell after a good 10 years the first time. But in his side business, he's helped the likes of Liverpudlian boxer Tony Bellew himself an Everton fan. Tennis player Anna Ivanovic and her husband, who's ex-Germany captain Bastian Schweinsteiger. And apparently he's harnessed their full potential.
Yeah.
Which, as that's the last one on the list, I would say it's certainly different to the old career of running a pub.
It certainly is. That's quite a list you come up with there, Don. Thank you very much for doing all the research on them. Just before we finish up, I'm going to have a little look through the list here and pick up a few names. Just very quickly talk about some of these. But Charlie Birch is an interesting one. He's currently a one-game wonder. Hopefully he won't be. Hopefully that'll change very soon and you'll get a few games this season. I mean, you go back through, you've got a lot of young lads who's also made one games. Like we mentioned, Josh Todd, obviously. Yeah. Carl Taylor, who just disappeared after that one game on the final game of the season under Curl. I don't think he even got a professional contract, Taylor, actually.
No, really interesting one. There's a few like that.
Yep. Let me have a look down through the list here. You've obviously got Dan Kirkup's one, obviously mentioned before. Ryan Heavycombe, one of those players that Roddy Collins signed when he signed loads at the start of the season, didn't he? I think he talked about him as the new Ryan Giggs at one point.
Yeah.
Which didn't really help. The one I did want to mention, obviously, is Scott Willis. Interesting one. He made his debut against Luton on the opening day of the 2001-2002 season. A 2-0 defeat. Roddy Collins' first game as manager. First proper first-team fixture. He signed a few players before that game to make sure we had a squad together because obviously they'd been decimated in the summer. Also making his debut that day, Peter Murphy. Both players were on 1-month contracts. I think they were both offered extended deals to the end of the season. Murphy took his, Scott Willis didn't. He decided to try his luck at Lincoln. I think he did okay at Lincoln, but he disappeared out of the game after that. I think it's fair to say Peter probably made the right choice out of the two of them there.
Definitely.
Okay,
and probably you couldn't get further from a one-game wonder, could you?
Exactly. A record outfield appearance holder. Sean Friars is an interesting one. He made an appearance that same season as well. I think he signed on permanent non-contract terms. I can't remember the game. I think it might have been against Mansfield he played, but he almost got us a points deduction because...
What was that for again? I remember that now.
He was only registered to play in a reserve team game. And I have a feeling that the person who confirmed whether players were available or not was on holiday that day, and no one bothered to check whether he was available. I seem to remember I've read an article somewhere that said that. We only got a fine. I think we lost 2-0 anyway. I think we got a small fine instead because it was seen as an honest mistake. And
isn't that so typically Carlisle United?
Very typical. Yeah. In that same season, you had Michael Dickinson as well, famously number 40 in that game away at Hartlepool. Because how cheap the club was back then, they didn't have enough letters left or couldn't afford to get the letters to put on the back of his shirt, so he just had number 40. And that was in the days when we did have squad numbers. Unbelievable. Another one I would like to give a mention to is Alan Gray, actually, funny enough, a local lad. He played one game in the 97-98 season under Wilson Halpin. Went on to a very successful non-league career, though, didn't he? I think he did really well at Workington, and I think Penrith as well, possibly.
Did he play at Gretna or Queen of the South as well?
I think he was at Gretna and Queen of the South, I think there was a lot of talk he might come back at one point, but never quite worked out. But then you go back down through the list, there's a few more, but the only one left that really stands out for me is Ian Knight, and how terribly unlucky he was in his career.
Yeah, very.
He was a player who a lot was thought of when he was at Sheffield Wednesday. I think he played for England U21s, and there was talk he was going to be like a £1 million defender and the next big name in the game.
Yeah, I mean, for the younger listeners, £1 million back then, you're probably talking £10 million now.
Yeah, well, bear in mind, I think that's pretty much what Man United paid for Eric Cantona at the same time.
Yeah.
He played for Sheffield Wednesday in a cup game, I think a League Cup game against Chester City, and he suffered one of the most horrific leg breaks you could possibly imagine. I think his leg was broken in 7 different places.
Yeah,
he was challenged by Gary Bennett, not the Gary Bennett that played for us, the one who played for Chester and Wrexham. And basically after that he never fully recovered. Played on the opening day of the season for us in 92-93, I think against Walsall, and managed to break his leg again, I think, in the same game. It just desperately unlucky as a player.
Yeah.
You couldn't really ask for worse luck, could you?
Yeah, I can remember him breaking it, actually. Yeah,
it's pretty awful, that, really. And that's it, really. A lot of the other names is much of a muchness, really. I think we've gone through the most interesting stories, particularly from recent times in the past. really interesting to look back at, isn't it? You don't see it as much at the moment because I think because of the lack of short-term loans, you might see it less and less now, possibly as the years go on.
Yeah, and like you say, I think it'll mainly be your youth team hopefuls getting the odd game here and there.
Well, the last few years, that definitely is the case. You've got Jack Egan in there as well. So yeah. But yeah, thanks for the chat, Dan. Really enjoyed that. Really interesting to go back through the history books. What do you fancy next? We're going to look at kits with the new kit coming out soon.
I would say we've got new kits, and possibly one that came to mind when I was looking through our paperwork. Maybe a look at trialists with hopefully football starting to move forward a gear in the coming weeks.
Yeah, let's do that then.
No problem.
Ta-ra, mate.
J'attends un appel de balle. Il trouve Devinder. Bagal. Qui va rentrer, qui va frapper. Arrêt de terre et but. But de Bagal avec une balle qui ricoche sur le poteau. Jean-Claude Bagal qui n'avait encore pas marqué au Racing Club de Lens et qui vient de réussir un superbe frappe à ras de terre.
Thanks once again, everyone, for listening to this week's episode. Went on a bit longer than we thought it would, actually, but I think it was really good. We've got some really interesting stories out there. Or in the case of Barry Thompson at Ilkeston, relived the nightmare for Dan, as he can remember that quite vividly, sadly. But yeah, really, really good topic. We'll be doing these specials throughout the summer. If you've got any suggestions for what you'd like to hear us talk about, please let us know. You can email us at bruntonbugle@gmail.com or get us on Twitter at bruntonbugle. Or you can ask me or Dan on the Be Just and Fear Not Facebook group. We're always on there having a chat about all things Carlisle United. The next episode we think is probably going to be a special about the history of Carlisle United kits. That's to obviously mark the fact that the new kit is coming out this week. As well as that, me and Mike Booth are going to sit down and we're going to relive the 05-06 season. We're going to rewatch the match highlights DVDs and just talk about the games and what happened during that season. So that should be a really interesting one. If you've got any memories of that season, please share them with us. We'd really love to talk about those on the show. Once again, you can find the podcast on all the good podcast apps. That's Acast, Google Podcast, Apple Podcast, Spotify as well. You find it all those places. So please remember to subscribe and you'll get every episode automatically into your app and you won't have to go searching for it whenever it's published. You can find out more about the podcast at bruntonbugle.com, and again, you can find us on Twitter. Thanks for listening and bye.